Hi everybody, it's Laura. Thank you so much for joining me. Today I have a layout that I made using the April Shimmerz Color Kitz collection. As soon as I saw this piece of pattern paper, I knew I was going to be using my Shimmerz paints to make all of these black and white flowers colorful. To do this, I used a couple of different colors. I used Pip Pip Cherry O, which is a Shimmerz color. That's the pink color that I'm using now. I also use a Vibez called Mustard Seed. That's the yellowish color. And then I also use Orange Sherbet. That's also a Shimmerz. And I used these three colors and I painted almost all of the flowers on this piece of pattern paper. I left a couple of the petals white and painted the center so I would have some white flowers, but the majority of them I painted pink, orange, or yellow. And whenever I'm working with paint, I always like to add multiple layers. I'm not just putting flat layers, but I'm adding some extra color where I want the flowers to be a little darker, so maybe in the center or maybe along one side of the petals, just so that they'll look a little bit more interesting. So I'm going to show you the flowers in a little while, but I have put that sheet aside to dry, and now I'm moving on to my background. If you've been following me, you probably know that I like to use 120-pound cardstock. I use the smooth cardstock, and then I coat it with some Liquitex gesso. And then I love the packaging technique, so I'm using a small piece of plastic. I like to use a small piece so that I have more control. And mustard seed, that same color that I use for some of the flowers, and I'm adding some color to my background. My idea for this layout was to use some strips of pattern paper, and I know that most of them are going to be blue. Some of them are going to be yellow or have touches of yellow, so I thought that this yellow would be a nice complement to the blue. And then, as I love to do, and I do on many layouts, I added lots and lots of splatters. I try to make sure that I have splatters all over the area of color, but particularly around the outside edge of the area of color so you could really see them. So even though I use a lot of the same techniques all the time, I accidentally tried something new, and I kind of like the way it turned out. I used this kind of large brush, and I spread the shimmers onto the piece of plastic, and then I didn't add any water. I just immediately pressed it onto the background, and it actually transferred that brush stroke onto my paper. So you can actually see the strokes of paint, and I think it looks pretty cool, and it's a little bit different from the rest of the paint that's on the background. So I'm thinking that I might be able to explore this further on other layouts, but I was pretty happy with the results. And so I allowed that to dry, and then I added some modeling paste. I'm just adding a little bit. I'm using this Americana stencil. I believe it's called Pixelated, something like that. I will put the information in the description box. And it's a very subtle stencil. It has lines of the tiniest little hexagons that I have ever seen. And it's a stencil that I go to over and over again when I want something that's really subtle. I was thinking about stamping in the background too, but then I decided I didn't want to do that because I wanted this layout to be very, very fresh and clean looking. And I thought that if I added some stamping, it might look cool, but it wasn't going to help me get the look that I was looking for. Not saying that you can't have a layout that has stamping on it that isn't fresh and clean looking, but I usually use black in the background, and I just wanted to go with the yellow and the orange and the modeling paste. And the modeling paste that I'm using is from the Crafters Workshop. That's something that I got recently from Retake Remake, which is a place that has art supplies that you can get secondhand. And they had a whole big lot of different, the Crafters Workshop modeling pastes of all different types and colors. So I feel like the white one is the one that I use the most, but I grabbed a few others and I'll have to try those out on some other layouts. So now I have some strips of paper going horizontally. I'm also going to have some going vertically. I really liked the daisies with the blue background and the yellow in the center, and also the diamonds. So I used just a small strip of the diamonds, and then I picked out a couple of other strips to go vertically. I was thinking that I could include some yellow strips. I didn't want to have too many of those though, because I have the yellow in the background and I wanted there to be some difference between the background and the pattern papers so that the pattern papers would stand out. So I decided to mainly use the blue pattern papers, and then I also worked in the one paper that has some yellowish lines on it, and then this thin strip of paper. I really like that yellow paper with the flowers on it. And right now I'm trimming. I always feel like I'm giving my paper a haircut whenever I trim multiple pieces of paper or strips of paper shorter. And now I'm using some ink to ink the edges of my strips of paper. I think that just really helps them to stand out from the background and from each other. I'm very big on contrast in my layouts. I was like that years ago when I used to make oil paintings. I always liked there to be a lot of contrast between the colors. So some of the oil paintings I made were a little dramatic because there was so much contrast, but that's just what I like. But now I'm inking the edges of the strips of paper that are going to go vertically on my layout. And I forgot, I did not initially include any of the pattern paper that has the yellow boxes or lines. I add that later on because I felt like I didn't have enough strips of paper going vertically. And a lot of times I will attach my strips of paper down to other pieces of paper. You can see that I'm using some white cardstock in the back because that just really helps me to be able to manipulate them on my layouts. I really don't like it when there's a whole bunch of different elements and none of them are attached down and they're kind of flopping around. So this just helps me to keep my sanity when I'm putting the elements of my layout together. So I have my photo layered on top, and immediately I was thinking I want to add more to the vertical strips. As I said, I decided that I was going to add this piece of pattern paper. And I'm inking the edges of the papers that have predominantly yellow or yellow tones in them with Distress Oxide in Fossilized Amber. So now all of those vertical strips have been attached together to become one, and the two horizontal strips have been attached to each other to become one, and that makes it easier for me to put the whole layout together. Now, I decided before I was going to add my strips of paper and my photo to the background that I wanted to add some orange splatters. So I once again grabbed my Shimmerz in orange Sherbet and I put a little bit out on my mat and added some water to it, and then I added splatters to the background. And I really could never get enough splatters, so I went back in and added a few more yellow splatters for good measure. I just really love the way splatters look. So I continued adding the yellow splatters until I felt like I was satisfied, or at least nearly satisfied, with the number of splatters that I had on the layout. And I know I said I didn't want to put stamping on the background because I didn't want to introduce too much darkness. I wanted to keep the layout looking very clean, but I knew that I was going to have some elements of black on the layout, so I thought that I would add just a couple of splatters of black watered down acrylic paint to the background just to make sure that I could have some common area between my embellishments and pattern papers and my background. So I'm using this picture of my daughter Danielle. We were in an antique store in Pennsylvania, and she was holding two trolls, and I don't remember whether she purchased them or not. She has quite a huge collection of trolls. And I have to say, they've gotten really expensive, even at flea markets and garage sales. She hunted for them for quite a while. This is a couple of years ago now. She's not buying them anymore. But they have gotten really expensive. So if you see any inexpensive trolls, maybe you want to check out, see if they're worth anything. I use a very thin mat of black cardstock. I put some green pattern paper from the kit on top of it, and then my photo was already matted in white paper, so I put that on top of the other two papers. And now I wanted to add some photo corners, so I thought the pink would look really nice with the green. So I had these little scraps of paper. These are from the paper that I cut all of the flowers out of, the one that I painted at the beginning of the layout. There were a couple of pink dots, so I decided that I was going to punch those out, and then I inked the edges of these with Victorian Velvet Distress Oxide. And then I attached one in each of the four corners of my photo. So now I have my background completed. I have my strips cut out and attached to each other and inked, and I have my photo ready to put on the layout. So I'm first attaching my photo to the strips of paper, and of course trying to be very careful that I have everything centered and straight. And next, I put some adhesive on the back of not just those strips of paper, but my photo as well, and I attach that down. So now I'm thinking I need even more strips of paper. I just felt like it looked a little sparse behind my photo. So I'm adding a couple of more strips of paper in the same pattern papers that I had already on the layout. Well, I have quite a few flowers to use on the layout, but I needed some leaves to go with them. So I decided to pick out a die that I felt had leaves on it that were about the right size to go with the flowers, and I die cut a bunch of them, and I used a cold press watercolor paper, just an inexpensive paper, and I think that the watercolor paper works really well with the Shimmerz paints. And then I began using a Shimmerz called Wee Bit O' Green to add some color to them. I also added in a little bit of the mustard seed to some of them, just so they all wouldn't be the exact same color. I really like there to be some kind of differences between the different elements on the page. Even if they're the same element, I don't want all of them to look exactly the same most of the time. There are very few so-called rules that I follow all the time, but I do have a few that I do try to keep, and one of them is whenever I'm painting things, I do like there to be some variation in the color that I paint things. I don't like it to just be a solid mass of flat color. I like there to be some different shades of either different colors or the same color when I'm painting. I'm going to call this layout My Sunshine. I'm using one of the pieces from the ephemera kit, and I placed the ephemera piece on this piece of black cardstock, and then I fussy cut around it, just a really, really thin black mat, just so the title would stand out a little bit. And then in addition to the ephemera pack, we also get a sheet that we can color in and cut out. And I use a number of things from that sheet on this page. So far I have the sun, and then I'm also using the rainbow that's right on top of my photo. I have the butterfly to the right of the rainbow, and then down at the bottom where you see the title, I have some mushrooms. And all of those are from that cut apart sheet. So on the bottom of the layout now you could see all those flowers. I painted them, but I didn't show you what they looked like when they were completed. And now I'm using them to embellish the layout. So I have a couple around the sun. I like the way that looks. A few around the rainbow. And I'm going to scatter them in a couple of different places on the layout. Now I'm going to let you know that I think I kind of overdid it with some of the flowers. So you're going to see two different pictures of this layout at the end of this video. I'm going to show you the layout the way it looked when I first finished it, and then I'm also going to show you the way it looked when later on I edited it down a little bit. I think I just got a little bit too carried away with the flowers, because you could see there's a diagonal line going from the sun down to the title, and you'll see that even more in a little bit. You'll see the flow of that because I add even a few more embellishments. And then I added some flowers in the lower left-hand corner and the upper right-hand corner. And in the end, I think that might have just kind of made the layout look just a little bit overdone. So I'll show you what it looks like now. I just took off a couple of the flowers, and I think it makes a big difference, and it makes the layout look a little cleaner and easier to read. As you can see, I'm popping that rainbow up on some foam. First, I put some heavy white cardstock behind it because I don't like when things are popped up on foam and then they kind of sag either later on or sometimes immediately. I just like to make sure that there's enough structure to the embellishments so that I can pop them up on some foam and they will look straight and nothing bends or sags. I decided I would also pop up the title on some foam. I use self-adhesive foam like many people do to add some dimension to my layout. I like it because it's not super dimensional, just adds a little bit of dimension. I really like that, and it's very handy to use it when it has the one side that already has the adhesive on it. I arranged the mushrooms along with some flowers on top of the title. I am going to switch that up a little bit because I decided to introduce some other elements to the layout. And right now I am doing the same thing to the sun that I did to the rainbow and the title. I'm reinforcing it, and then I'm adding some foam to the back so that it will have a little bit of dimension. Now the sun is reinforced, it has some foam on it, and I'm adding some ATG adhesive and putting it at the top of the page. And then I went around the layout and I attached all of the flowers and anything else that wasn't attached down to the layout down to the background. Now I have my leaves, and I'm going to be sprinkling some leaves around the layout. Of course, I'm putting the leaves next to the flowers. And I like the way the green looks with the flowers. I think that the green is a nice complement to the yellow and the orange and the pink and also the white flowers. So I'm not going to show all the footage of me adding the leaves because it took me a little while, but you could see here, this is where all the leaves ended up. And now I'm using some adhesive to attach all of them down. Included in the kit was a whole sheet of these really cool stickers. There were quite a few that I liked. I decided that I wanted to add a heart on top of the title and also on top of the rainbow. And then there are these little teeny tiny little dots that were on there in the perfect colors. So I decided to spread all of those all around the background. And I think that added a nice little kind of confetti look to the background. And I think it kind of went with the smiling sun and some of the other embellishments that I'm going to add in a few moments. And now I'm adding some other stickers from that sheet. One says loving and the other one says today. So I put those together to the left of the photo, and I think that added another just tiny little touch to the page that I think looks pretty. And most of those dots are circles, but there's one little blue one on the right-hand side of the layout that's like a really little teeny tiny heart, but I just mixed it in with all of those other little touches in the background. So I just added that heart to the rainbow. I just thought that was a cool little touch. And then one of my favorite things to add to finish off a layout is dots or jewels or pearls. And for this layout, I'm using kind of a mixture. The yellow centers that I'm adding now, those are some Queen and Company. They're called opals. They're self-adhesive, and there's a little bit of translucency to them, and I think they're just a really pretty look in the center of some of the flowers. I also wanted to have some pink centers, so I'm using some Park Lane stickers. These are faceted jewels, but they just have kind of a special look to them, and I got these ages ago in Joann's when I used to shop there every week, and sadly they're closing very soon. I also wanted to have some orange centers, so I added some faceted, just kind of like regular orange jewels to a few of the flowers, but I thought that all those different types of centers was a nice way to add some variety to the layout. And then for the photo corners, I often add some little touch to the photo corners. I added some blue dots. And then I found I had some really teeny tiny little pink enamel dots. And so I decided to add those to all of the little hearts on the page. So there's one by the title, there's one on top of the rainbow, and there's also one near the sentiments. So they all got a teeny tiny little enamel dot. So I decided that I wasn't too fond of the mushrooms with the flowers because they're approximately the same size, and I think it's really hard to make a really nice cluster when all the elements are the same size. I think I personally prefer to have some variety of sizes. So I decided to take the mushrooms away from the cluster with the title and include that really cute little caterpillar. And then I added a frog to the right of the photo, and I put those mushrooms with him, and I think that that looks a little bit better. And then I also wanted to add some enamel dots to just the horizontal banners. So I picked out some that were a little bit bigger than the other dots on the page, and that was the very last touch, and here are some close-ups. Don't forget, when you place an order with Shimmerz Paints, use my name in the comments to receive a free gift. And then in the description box of this video, you can find a link to the Shimmerz Paints website. You can find out about getting a subscription to the color kits, or check out the color kits that I use in this particular video, or check out any of the other great products they have, including a huge line of paints. And if you would like, let me know which of the two versions of this layout you like better in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a fantastic day, and I'll see you again soon. Take care. Bye-bye.